Hello guys. Welcome to part 2 of What If Naruto Was the Dead Man Walking. Please check out my other channel, Shadow Kage, for a variety of Naruto fanfictions, which many great ones are already completed. If you haven't, please feel obliged to join my Discord channel where you will be able to recommend new content to me and are able to talk to me directly. Thank you very much.
The moment the boat docked, the two boys jumped off of the boat and started walking into the small coastal village, Naruto with his hood up and Victor surprisingly with a blank forehead protector tied around his waist like a belt. It was something that hadn't been there the last time Naruto had looked. Just like Victor, though, Naruto had actually taken to wearing the similar blank forehead protector he had been given by Itachi like a scarf, though he did leave it loose so that it could be seen even with his hood pulled up and his coat fastened. The mist was a lot thinner at the moment than it had been on their approach to the land of water, but even so it still circled the village they were in on all sides and almost seemed to cut it off from the rest of the world. Naruto also noticed that unlike in the land of fire, the buildings seemed to be more rounded here, the architecture no doubt having changed to fit in with the different landscape and climate. All the buildings looked like half circles lying on top of the ground, with round windows and even round doors. It was for Naruto, who had grown up in Konoha, quite a surprise just how different the different countries were. The people in the village were all rather pale too, though Naruto assumed it was because of the lack of direct sunlight that came with constantly living in the mist. He had caught several looking at them as they passed out of the corner of his eye in curiosity, but the moment they saw the blank headbands, many of those looks were replaced by either fear or, in a few small cases, disgust. Already Naruto was starting to see the attitude people were having towards them, and it made him frown behind his mask and pull his hood down a little further. After they had been walking for 10 minutes seemingly at random, Naruto turned to look at Victor from under his hood. "Where are we meeting these friends of yours?" Victor seemed to take a moment to think this over before giving a shrug, his eyes still scanning their surroundings as they continued on through the village. "No idea, never actually, though to be honest I have not really met any of them before." His words brought Naruto to a complete stop, the older boy himself soon stopping him when he realized that the masked blonde was not following, at which point he turned to look at him with a raised eyebrow in silent question. It took Naruto a moment to calm down, so he didn't just start shouting at his friend in the middle of the street for all and sundry to hear. "If you never met them before and haven't arranged an actual meeting place, then how in hell are we supposed to find the people taking us to the camp?" Naruto asked, his tone somewhat strained as he tried not to give in to his irritation, the smile on Victor's face only making that harder. Instead of getting worried, though, Victor instead just gave him another of his overly large grins, before turning on his heel and starting to walk off again, turning his head and speaking over his shoulder as he did so. "Don't worry, we'll know them when we see them, trust me. Just look for people that stand out and don't belong, they're like us, but you know, older." Naruto could feel his eye twitching behind his mask, but quickly moved to follow Victor before he got too far ahead. He may be a little pissed off with his eccentric friend, but that didn't mean he was going to go off by himself in a strange land whilst being surrounded by hostile people. As it turned out, Victor wasn't wrong about being able to find the group that was going to take them to the outcast camp, and within another 5 minutes they turned a corner and saw 3 people that definitely didn't belong in the village standing at the end of a road just outside the village's border. The first person there to catch his eye was a giant of a man that was standing easily over 8 feet tall, making him clearly visible above the heads of the other people around him. The man was built like a bodybuilder, with muscles on his muscles, each of which could be seen moving under his skin, with arms and legs looking more like tree trunks than limbs in terms of size. The man's head was shaved with the exception of a line of black hair that went down the middle of his head, which went all the way from his brow to the back of his neck, before turning into a long braid that fell to his lower back. As they came closer, Naruto also noted the fact that the man was wearing nothing but a brown loincloth, leaving the rest of his body bare for the entire world to see. This also included the blood-red tribal tattoos that covered every inch of his body, including his face. The last thing about the man that stood out was his eyes, which were a very dark blue and that seemed to stand out from the rest of his body. There was a blank forehead protector around his waist for a belt that was holding up his loincloth, the blank plate identifying him as an outcast like Naruto and Victor. The second figure that was waiting for them was a woman, only she looked a lot more normal than the giant, at first sight at least. The image of normality, however, was broken as they came closer, by the single prominent yellow eye that was located the middle of her head, the single eye replacing the two that a person would normally have. The woman was an average height with shoulder-length red hair. She wore light green clothing with leather padding for armor over the top. Her outfit looked to be designed so that it gave her some protection, whilst not restricting her movements and showing off her curves at the same time. She was also wearing what looked like goggles that had been specifically made for her one eye, which after seeing them coming she pulled down so as to cover and hide said eyes from view due to the tinted glass of the goggles. Naruto thought she looked to be the youngest of the group, no older than her late teens at the most. She also had a longbow in her hand that was as long as she was tall, with a leather quiver on her back full of arrows with white feathers on the ends. Her blank headband was tied to her left arm just below her shoulder, visible for all to see whilst not getting in the way. By the time Naruto turned his attention to the last man of the group, he thought he was done being surprised, until he saw that this man didn't seem to have any eyes at all. In the place where his eyes would usually be was nothing but unblemished skin. He was dressed in simple traditional gray robe-like clothes that hung loosely on his slim form. He had very long white hair that fell loosely to his chest and covered most of his face from view. He also had a scraggly unshaved beard, which whilst not particularly long or well-groomed, still seemed to fit him. The eyeless man was without a doubt the oldest member of the small group, and from what Naruto could see of his face it was worn and covered in deep wrinkles that reminded him of Sarutobi Hiruzen back in the Hidden Leaf Village. The man also had a long bow staff clasped in both of his hands, which was currently being used as a walking. On the top of his bow staff there was what looked like a small bell. Like the other people with him, the man also wore a blank forehead protector, but unlike the others his headband was actually tied to his forehead. To finish off his ensemble, he also wore a pair of old-fashioned wooden sandals that made an audible click with every step he took. The three shinobi were being sent more odd looks and glares than both Naruto and Victor had as they had walked through the village, but none of the three seemed to really be paying them the slightest bit of attention. As Naruto and Victor approached, the blonde could see the one-eyed woman pointing to Victor before leaning over to whisper something to the other two. Victor, unlike Naruto, showed absolutely no hesitation as he walked over to the three adults, his usual grin on his face and hands in his pockets as if to show just how relaxed he was with the situation. Naruto, on the other hand, found himself slowing slightly and standing a little further back, unsure if he was as welcome as Victor, especially seeing as he was new to the outcast life. So instead of going straight up to the trio like Victor did, he hung back slightly, listening as Victor spoke to their guides and introduced himself, making sure to remember the names they had in turn. The giant man with the tattoos was apparently called Okaramashita Kaijin, though he told them to just call him Kaijin. His voice was very deep and Naruto could almost feel the vibrations in his chest as he spoke. The woman was named Kat-Aim Shappu, and seemed to be very soft-spoken, unlike her much bigger and more muscled companion. As for the old man, he was named Burendo Furue, though he told them to just call him Old Man. His voice sounded as old as he looked, but there was a small smile on his lips as he talked, and the genuineness of it was evident as it did put Naruto more at ease. It seemed that Victor had all but forgotten him by this point, and Naruto was about to speak up when Furue the old man turned in his direction with his eyeless face as if he were looking right at him. "Who is your friend, Victor? I can hear his heartbeat behind you, but he has yet to introduce himself," the old man said in a strong voice, which belied his thin and aged appearance. This statement got the attention of the other two, both of whom now turned around to look at him before turning back to Victor. Said boy, blinking in confusion for a moment, before a look of realization crossed his face as he remembered that Naruto was with him. As that realization struck, he started grinning again, before lunging forward and grabbing Naruto's arm to pull him forward. I almost forgot, this is, well, we don't have a name for him yet. I tried giving him a few, but he didn't seem to like any of the names I came up with for him. But anyway, he is kind of new to the outcast life, so I offered to let him tag along with me. Hope you don't mind," Victor said enthusiastically, his tone and expression telling all those in the vicinity that he didn't really give a damn whether or not they minded. Naruto tilted his head up slightly at his sort of introduction so that the other three, or rather two adults, could see his masked face, and after doing so he was a little surprised to see them giving him an understanding look. Furuwe was the one to actually step forward, somehow laying his hand on Naruto's shoulder even though he could not see it. I do understand, as while it is rare, it's not unheard of for new faces to join the outcasts. If I may ask, what was it that caused you to run? The fact you do not want to give a name says that there may be people looking for you. The old man asked, his voice gentle and kind as he spoke to Naruto, though not patronizing, which Naruto was grateful for. Naruto swallowed the lump in his throat as his eyes moved to each of the adults and teenagers in front of him, still very much aware that Furuwe's hands were still on his shoulder. I unlocked a new bloodline that forces me to eat souls for sustenance. Naruto managed to get out, his voice somewhat strained as he gave out information that he was not totally comfortable sharing. He didn't miss the surprised looks that crossed Kaijin and Shappu's faces when he said this, though both were quick to hide it. However, it was Furuwe's reaction to his words that got the most of his attention, as a small frown crossed his lips as his head tilted slightly to the side, as if he was listening to something only he could hear. But it was replaced with another smile as he pulled his hand away, giving a small understanding nod as he did so. I see, yes, that would defiantly put you in with us outcasts. Few people would be understanding to your situation, but you have nothing to fear of those among us. You are not the first that has special needs, and I doubt you will be the last. But enough talk for now, we must be leaving. It is a 2-day walk to the camp, and these old bones need to get moving before they seize up.
Furuwe gave a light chuckle as he said the last part, before making exaggerated groans and slow movements as he turned to start walking off into the mist. The others were quick to follow the older man's lead. As they walked, Naruto noted that there seemed to be no consistency with the mist around the land of water. They could be walking without being able to see an inch in front of them one moment, only for it to suddenly clear enough to suddenly see hundreds of meters into the distance the next. Naruto spent most of the first day simply following behind the rest of the group and keeping quiet. This was mainly as he was not sure what he could talk about with people that had spent their whole lives as outcasts. Naruto, coming from a privileged background as the son of Konoha's leader, did make it harder to relate to people who have spent their entire lives in constant struggle. Victor, even though he had never met any of them before today, seemed to have things in common with the 3 other outcasts, and Naruto had listened as they talked about good places to set up camp around the elemental nations. However, while he didn't speak to them himself, Naruto did take the time to observe each of the adults as they walked, taking note of different things he was sure would be good to remember. Kaijin, the big tattooed man, didn't seem to talk much. Instead, he seemed to much prefer giving short answers or grunts when someone asked him a question. He also had a fire affinity, something that Naruto had learned after Victor asked the giant of a man for a light, to which he had simply grunted before holding out his hand toward the member of the Frankenstein clan. With a click of his fingers, Kaijin's tattoos around his hands started to glow a soft red color, before without a sound a small flame sprung to life on the end of his thumb, which he had then used to light up Victor's cigarette, a nonchalant expression on his face as he did so, and a slight grunt as Victor flamboyantly thanked him. Shappu, however, was without a doubt one of the clumsiest people Naruto had ever met or seen before, and seemed unable to go 2 minutes without tripping on something even if the ground at her feet was perfectly smooth. He had seen her actually walk into a tree at one point when she took off her goggles to clean them, only to draw her bow a moment later and somehow hit a rabbit 200 meters ahead of them. When they had gotten closer, Naruto was surprised to see that the arrow had hit it in the heart and killed it instantly, and he had quickly eaten the soul as she strung the dead animal onto her belt to eat later. Then there was Furuwe. The first thing that Naruto noticed was that despite him not having any eyes, the old man was more sure-footed than any of them as they walked, and despite his earlier claims of being old, he had been easily able to keep up with the rest of the group as they walked. The sound of both his wooden sandals and the bell at the end of his bowstaff seemed to echo slightly in the mist even over their voices, making it so that there was never a moment of complete silence. Like Naruto, the man seemed to be simply listening to the others talking, though he would happily join in the conversation when it was directed at him. Naruto was also convinced that Furuwe was the leader of the 3 outcasts who had come to meet them, at least based on the way they were all interacting. The other two would continually look to the old man for instructions, and the moment he started speaking, everyone else stopped to listen to his words. Even Victor showed the man more respect than Naruto thought his friends capable of. Naruto couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something, but didn't voice it as they walked. Eventually, the sky had started to darken and their visibility was decreased even more as the cold night air brought in more mist, and soon after they were forced to set up camp for the night. They were able to find a fallen tree to set up next to so that it covered their backs both from the cold wind and potential attack, though the moisture in the air was already rotting it away, so how long their shelter would last was debatable. Because of the mist, the group had no need to worry about an enemy spotting their fire, which made the night much more comfortable than it would have been without a fire. How they actually made a fire, though, Naruto wasn't sure, as he very much doubted that there was a dry branch for miles, and had no wish to try and find any. Luckily, one of the others seemed to know what they were doing, and after Shappu had finished setting up the fire with somewhat firewood, Kaijin had lit it with his thumb again, and before long the small group was sat around the warm fire chatting quietly. Naruto had sat himself slightly away from the group, not actually needing the warmth from the fire due to his abilities, or really feeling like it was his place to sit with them yet in the first place. However, after a few minutes of sitting with his back to the tree, Naruto's thoughts were interrupted by Furue letting out a loud, exaggerated groan as he sat next to him, the bell on the end of his staff giving one more ring as he leaned it against the log. "You'll get sick sitting over here. You really should move closer to the fire," the old man said, his warm voice carrying over to Naruto. Naruto was about to give a shrug, but realized that the action would be redundant and let out a sigh instead. "I don't really feel the cold. I actually prefer it to heat and bright lights, actually." Furue just gave a small nod, humming his understanding. The two fell into silence for several minutes after that, Naruto looking to the older outcast out of the corner of his eyes as he did so, while Furue just sat quietly with his head tilted to the side slightly. Naruto watched as Furue pulled out a long smoking pipe from the inside of his robes, taking his time as he filled it with tobacco before also taking out a matchbox and lighting it. After that, the old man leaned back and took several deep puffs, quietly blowing out smoke rings as he did so. Eventually, the silence was broken yet again as Furue shifted slightly so he was facing more in Naruto's direction. "So tell me, how much do you know about outcasts and rogue clans? After all, you are one of us now. Maybe I can help fill in a few of the blanks for you." Slightly surprised by the man's generosity, Naruto shifted himself from where he was sitting against the tree, making it so he was facing more towards Furue, licking his lips slightly as he did so. "Actually, not much. I read a book about them, but it was only general information and didn't go into anything specific. Victor's been explaining a few things to me, though. Mostly it was about his own clan." Upon hearing that, Furue gave a small chuckle, before nodding his head slightly. "Yes, Victor does seem like a very talkative lad. Why don't I start with telling you about those in our little group? I'm sure you are curious." "That would be good, thank you." Naruto watched as Furue gave him another smile, before setting himself down more comfortably against the tree he was leaning on and taking a moment to think before starting. "Let's start with Shappu, shall we? I am sure you have noticed that she is not what many would call normal. Shappu is a member of the Kataine clan, who specialize in the use of their bows and long-range combat. As you have no doubt noticed, they are born with only one eye, but with that one eye they are able to see for miles ahead so long as nothing is obstructing their view. However, because of this, the members of the Kataine clan are very long-sighted, which means they have trouble seeing things close up. That is why Shappu wears her goggles. They help her see nearby things around her. When the hidden villages were first created, the clan was well known for their phenomenal skill with Bao and as scouts, but because of the issues with their sight, they were also seen as defective and were therefore not invited to join any of the growing shinobi villages. Naruto couldn't believe what he was hearing, for a whole clan of skilled ninja to be written off because of a small weakness that was easily fixed by glasses. He had seen Chopper's skill with his own eyes, and could only imagine what those skills would do to an enemy. Every technique had a weakness, even if some were kept a better secret than others. Why should Chopper's clan have to suffer just because their weakness is slightly more obvious than other ones? Weaknesses could be easily overcome. Chopper's goggles were an example of that. Before Naruto could say anything in response to the old man's words, Furue continued. Next in our little group is Kaijin, a member of the Okuramashita clan, or as they are better known, the Berserker clan. The Okuramashita clan were once one of the most feared clans around, or at least they were before the hidden villages were founded, and many that still remember them continue to fear them to this day. They draw power from their anger and pain, using it to make themselves stronger in battle. Back during the clan wars, a single member of the Okuramashita clan could be seen fighting upwards of 20 enemies at once and utterly destroying them. However, it is almost impossible for a member of the clan to control themselves in battle, and they were sometimes unable to tell friend from enemy on the battlefield. This meant that whilst in their battle-fueled rage they would attack everyone and everything they could, and so were seen as mindless beasts and were again not welcome when the hidden villages were formed. Naruto couldn't help but look over to Kaijin at this point, watching as he tore into the rabbit he had been cooking over the fire. While the man was large and intimidating, Naruto still found it hard to picture a single man capable of fighting so many shinobi at once. However, at the same time, he could actually understand why his clan might not have been welcome in the hidden villages even if he didn't like it. What use is a soldier that can't tell the difference between friend and foe in battle after all? Victor and his clan you already have an idea about, so I guess that just leaves me. I am a member of the Burendo clan, and as I am sure you noticed already, we are born without eyes. I have never seen, and neither has anyone else in my clan. However, it was because of this that we learned ways to see without our eyes, enhancing and honing our other four senses to phenomenal levels. I can actually smell the forests of the land of fire clinging to your skin, more so than Victor after the two of you crossed it getting here. But our sense of hearing has always been the strongest, allowing those experienced enough to actually be able to see the world around us just by using sound waves bouncing off of objects like sonar. However, one of the unforeseen side effects was the ability to be able to tell when someone is lying. Naruto felt himself stiffen slightly, suddenly very nervous and afraid of the man sat next to him as he continued talking. I can hear when the heart rate picks up, which is a big indicator, but there are other tells that most do not or are incapable of perceiving. Like the slight increase of body heat that comes with nerves, the spike in certain pheromones too subtle for even those using chakra to sense normally, I can sense. All these things come together to tell us when someone is lying, like you were when you said you had unlocked a bloodline. Naruto was ready to bolt, just run off into the mist and hope he could lose the group. But before he could, Furue grabbed him by the shoulder in an iron grip and held him in place, showing a surprising amount of strength for someone of his age. You don't need to run, boy, I will not say anything. While you lied about the bloodline, you were also telling the truth about the souls, that much I know. Naruto felt himself relax ever so slightly when he heard that, but that did not mean he fully let his guard down. He was still tensed and ready to run the moment Furue let go of his shoulder if he had to. I can't let people know about me, not yet. I need to be stronger before people know the truth. Naruto said, his voice resolute as he turned to look at where Furue's eyes would have been, if he actually had any. In response to his words, Furue gave a small nod of acknowledgement, the hand on his shoulder turning more comforting and loosening slightly. It was still firmly held, but Naruto was sure he would be able to break it with a little effort now. Plus he also had his hatchet held at his belt. He had seen what he was capable of with a weapon when he was surprised and unprepared. He knew that if necessary he could do a lot of damage with his weapon, especially if he used his unique grayish chakra. After all, if just touching it rotted away Victor's finger, what would getting hit by a sharp weapon covered in the stuff do? I understand, child, you have your reasons. It is your secret and you do not mean harm to us by keeping it, but I had to be sure. If you ever do feeling the need to talk about it though, know I will always be around to listen. I should also warn you there will be others in the camp able to tell the truth, both parts, and even a few that may know exactly what you are. They will mean you no more harm than me, as long as you mean the rest of us no harm. As for the rebels, so long as you prove yourself useful, they will have no reason to cause trouble. Some of them are decent enough and can somewhat emphasis with our struggle. A few, though, are still mired in hate and hypocrisy. With that, Furue gave one more squeeze to Naruto's shoulder before using it to help himself to get back up to his feet, grabbing his staff as he did so. He calmly turned on his heel before making his way back over to the fire and leaving Naruto alone to his thoughts. The rest of the trip to the camp seemed to pass a lot more easily for Naruto after that night, the young blonde actually taken to talking with the others in the group more and stopped avoiding them like he had been doing before. He also got to know both Shappu and Kaijin a little more, and while they would never be best of friends with the age difference, Naruto did now think of them as friends. So much so that he had been able to banter with them, though much of the amusement was about his mask and how badly made it currently was, which had amused Naruto a lot, and also convinced him that he might need to make another mask. After all, it was supposed to not only hide his identity but also intimidate his enemies. Turns out it was not so much intimidating as it was laughable. He learned that Shappu and most of her clan tended to wander the land of lightning, the mountain terrain giving them plenty of high points to keep watch from, and apparently the views were beautiful when it wasn't too cloudy. She had also told him about how she liked to paint, and had shown Naruto a few of her paintings. Naruto had been a little shocked at just how lifelike the landscapes looked, and had first thought them to be photographs. Kaijin really didn't talk much at first, until the subject turned to fighting. The giant of a man talked about the battles he had been in and the thrill it gave him, the way it felt to charge headfirst and meet his opponents. Naruto had never heard someone talk so passionately of the honor it held. However, the other subject that got Kaijin talking was his family, which surprised Naruto considering his love of battle. Apparently he had both a wife and 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. Apparently his oldest son and daughter were in the land of snow, another land in the middle of civil war, even if not to the same scale as the land of water. Kaijin's youngest son was at the camp with his wife, and was apparently 14 years old and named Kimona. As it turned out, Furue also had a family, and he spoke of them with nothing but love in his voice. Though apparently they were not with the camp, Naruto had asked where they were, but Furue wouldn't say. He was also quite skilled at playing the ocarina, and had even taken one out and played as they walked at one point. The music echoing eerily around them in the mist, making it impossible to pinpoint where it was it came from without actually seeing Furue playing it. Apparently most of his clan tended to wander the border of the land of rain, something about it helping them to move around. Naruto didn't actually say anything about himself, not wanting to risk it. He did, however, explain a little more about what he could do, and showed them one of his spirits. However, as they came closer to the camps, Naruto noticed the group turning more serious and subdued. Even Victor stayed quiet for the most part. The mist had also been getting steadily thicker until it got to the point that they couldn't see further than a few feet in front of them, with the exception of Shappu, who was leading them now. Before long, Naruto found himself at the back of the group with Victor, trying not to lose sight of Kaijin's back as the giant walked in front of them. As they walked along side by side, the older boy started speaking. "We have to pass by the rebels' camp to get to the outcast camp, though we can't actually go through it. Just keep your head down and hood up. Don't say anything if we are approached, and let Furue do all the talking." "Why, what's the worst that could happen?" At his words, Victor gave Naruto one of his rare serious looks, absently pulling out a cigarette and lighter from one of his pockets. "We don't have a village to protect us, kiddo. No one will come to help us if something goes wrong. Shinobi know that, and use it to their advantage. Now there are many who won't start anything either through fear or common decency. But there are a nasty few who have given in to their intolerance, and with the rebellion as strained as it is now, the leaders would be more than likely to sacrifice a few outcasts if it meant keeping their army from infighting. Naruto had been hearing that a lot lately, and every time it made him frown. Then why don't the outcasts simply form their own village? You all seem to be able to communicate in some way or other to get the word out. Why not all come together and take away that advantage? Naruto was a little surprised when instead of Victor, Furue answered him from in front of Kaijin. The large man was blocking him from view, but his voice easily reached him. Where would we set it up? What daimyo would want a bunch of outcasts setting up permanently in their land? While there are civilians that would accept us and even willingly help us, how would we find them? Sure, together we could take most lands without too much trouble and even look for people to help keep things running once we build it, but it would just get the other hidden villages' attention and they would run us out before we could even get started. There is simply nowhere we could form a village. Naruto stayed silent after the old man stopped talking, taking in everything he had been told. He supposed he was right, building up a village from scratch took time and manpower. While the manpower may not be a problem, time always would, because the other hidden villages would see it as a threat and attack while they were not prepared to defend themselves. They needed somewhere that was isolated and highly defensible, but also somewhere that had a high civilian population. A shinobi village did not run on charity, after all it ran on money. With the most immediate money that was available to them being from the civilians within their home country. Naruto did have an idea, but there were many issues with that idea, some of which he very much doubted could be overcome, or at least not without significant help. Before he could think any more on his thought, though, something caught his attention. Looking up, he was surprised to find that they were no longer standing in the mist. Though when he looked back over his shoulder at the way they had come, he could see it still there in a solid white wall. Looking at the new scenery around them, Naruto was surprised to see that they were actually already passing the rebel camp on their right, and another camp was ahead in the direction they were walking. The rebel camp looked very militaristic, with orderly arranged tent in the same shapes as the buildings Naruto had seen back at the coastal village when they first arrived. All but 5 of the tents were the same size, with the other 5 being several times bigger and spaced out in such a way that they were as far as possible from each other while still being in the camp. Naruto also saw a lot of people moving around between the tents, most dressed in shades of blue and white ninja clothing with their mist headbands tied either to their foreheads or around their arms. He also didn't miss the way more than half the people in the camp were staring in his group's direction as they walked, and how some of them had started either frowning or outright glaring at them. Naruto even saw 1 or 2 of them with their hands on their weapons, as if preparing to attack. The dislike many of the rebels had for them was obvious, but as he looked at them, he didn't see as much hate as he was expecting to see. If anything, he could sense that the rebels were more filled with distrust and fear than any real malice. Naruto just made an effort to keep his head down and stay with the group like Victor warned him to. The group had almost passed the rebel camp when a middle-aged man and a girl that looked to be in her late teens came out from it and blocked their path, making both Naruto and Victor tense slightly while the adults seemed completely at ease. The man had pale blue hair that looked slightly spiky. He was wearing a dark gray turtleneck with a blue kimono with a white outline. He also had what looked like seal tags hanging from each ear like earrings, and his right eye was covered by a black eye patch. He stood straight with little expression on his face other than a small frown that Naruto suspected was usually on his face, and the hooded blonde didn't miss how the man's one visible eye moving over to him and Victor before moving back to Furue, who had now moved to the front of the group. The girl had long reddish/brown hair that covered her right eye, and a knot tied on the top of her head. She was dressed in a very revealing dark blue kimono that showed off her curves and left her shoulders bare, giving the slightest view of the mesh shirt she wore under it. Unlike the man's face, she looked a lot more relaxed, and Naruto could see the playful smirk on her face. Her eyes, just like the man who accompanied her, were also taking in the 2 newest and youngest members of the group before they turned back to Furue. "Good to see you back, Furue," And you even brought 2 new little cuties back with you," the red-haired woman said, her soft lilting tone carrying a note of both amusement and warmth to it that Naruto had not been expecting. Furuo just gave a slight chuckle, shifting his staff from one hand to the other, making the bell on the end of his staff ring as he did so. Naruto knew that he did it purposefully to send out a wave of sound so he could assess his surroundings, though looking at his face it looked like he knew who the 2 people were anyway. "May, a pleasure as always. I assume you have a reason for stopping us other than to say hello. We have spent the last 2 days walking after all," Furuo said, his voice holding a certain amount of warmth as he replied to the now named May. Despite the easy way the two were talking, Naruto could see the other people inside the camp were watching them tensely. It didn't take Naruto long to realize that this May was someone important, and that the man with the eye patch was her bodyguard. Though the two seemed to either not notice or care about the people watching them as May gave a nod of her head and her smirk dropped a little into a more serious expression. "I'm afraid so. We were able to capture one of Yagura's shinobi while you were gone. We are going to need you there for his interrogation to make sure he is telling the truth." "Of course, I completely understand. Why don't you lead the way while my friends here go on and get the new blood settled in?" The old man responded, seemingly not surprised by her request, this clearly having been asked of him many times before. "Of course." Furuo had only taken 2 steps to follow them when he paused for a moment, before turning around so that he was looking in Naruto's direction with his sightless eyes. The old man seemingly thinking something over as he sightlessly assessed Naruto. His pause quickly got the other 2 shinobi's attention and they too turned and stopped to wait for him, looking from the old man to Naruto but not saying a word. Eventually, a small smirk spread across Furuo's face before he motioned for Naruto to come over to him, moving the hooded blonde in front of him and holding his shoulder when he did before turning to look back at the woman. "Perhaps it would be a good idea for my new friend to join us. He has skills that may be able to help us get information." While the man showed no other reaction than to frown slightly, Naruto saw May's visible eyebrow lift slightly as she looked him over, a contemplative look on her face. "Is he another member of the Dorima clan? Because it is still early to get them involved yet. We haven't even started questioning him." "No, he is not from the Dorima clan. He is something different." Seeming to take a moment to examine him more closely, or at least examine what she could see of with his hood up, May finally gave one more look to Furuo before smiling and giving a nod. "Very well, I'll show you where we are keeping him if you are sure." As she turned away, Furuo leaned down slightly so he could whisper in Naruto's ear, making sure he wouldn't be overheard. "Remember what I said about showing yourself to be useful. This is your chance." Naruto made sure to stay close to Furuo as they were led through the camp, his eyes constantly scanning his surroundings as he carefully made his way through the cramped corridors and between the camp's tents. He put effort into trying to avoid tripping on any of the guy lines that crisscrossed their path as they moved their way through the encampment. The camp seemed to be set up like an organized maze, with the majority of the tents being made to look exactly the same, so it was impossible to know what was in which, as well as also making navigation difficult by removing anything that could be used as a reference point. On top of that was the fact that there were armed ninja at every turn, watching their every move, with several of the more cautious shinobi lightly fingering their weapons as they kept an eye on the strangers in the camp. It was more than a little unnerving for Naruto, but every time he hesitated, Furuo was always there to give him a small nudge and a light squeeze on the shoulder before anyone noticed. Despite the fact it should have been impossible to find their way around the camp, May was leading them with a confident stride that showed she knew exactly where they were going. After almost 15 minutes of walking, they came to a stop outside of one of the tents. This one, however, unlike the other similar ones they had passed, had 2 grim-looking shinobi standing outside it acting as guards, which Naruto cynically thought to himself they only made the thing stand out more from the others around it. Naruto was fairly sure they had been led in several circles throughout the camp before they came to a stop in front of this tent, which was probably done to make sure they were lost. Naruto was after all a new and untested recruit. The two guards outside the tent snapped to attention as Mei moved to stand in front of them, before the both of them walked away when she gave them slight a nod of the head. When the two were out of sight, she turned back to Furue, only for her eyes to move down to look at Naruto, a gentle smile spreading across her face as she knelt down to his level and laid her hand gently on his shoulder. "Okay, sweetie, Furue says you will be able to help us convince the man inside this tent to answer our questions. So I want you to tell me what you will be doing?" she asked, her voice kind, yet holding a note of firmness to it which revealed to Naruto that this was a woman who was used to giving orders and having them obeyed. Naruto, however, upon hearing that, frowned under his mask before shrugging the hand off of him. He knew it might come across as slightly petulant or childish, but at the same time he didn't travel all the way here to be treated like a child. He came here to grow stronger, which was something he wouldn't be able to do if he allowed people to talk down to him. However, instead of deliberately calling her out on it, Naruto stood silently and stared at her from under his hood with his baleful blue eyes. After a few minutes passed, Mei's smile turned back into a smirk as she stood up, seeming to be satisfied with something, though Naruto wasn't sure exactly what it was. Deciding he just wanted to get it over with so that he could rest and get himself settled into the outcast camp, Naruto spoke in a quiet voice that would be too low for any would-be eavesdroppers trying to listen into ear. "What do you need to know?" His question got a raised eyebrow, but the older woman seemed to take it in stride as she just gave him a casual shrug of the shoulders. "Anything that might be of use. Do you need him alive after you get the information?" was Naruto's bland reply, a response which got a raised eyebrow from both Mei and her bodyguard, the two of them clearly quite surprised by such a young boy asking such a question. "No, once we have the information you will be killed anyway. Why?" Mei said carefully, her gaze once again on Naruto, only this time it was more cautious and assessing. Instead of answering, Naruto gave a silent nod, motioning Mei to lead the way inside the tent. While still looking curious, Mei turned to the man with the eye patch who, upon meeting her eyes, pulled the flap of the tent back without a word and held it for them to walk through. The first thing Naruto noticed when he walked into the tent was the fact it was almost completely empty, with nothing inside other than a man tied to a chair in the middle of the space, and a desk with blank paper covering it and a pen in the corner. Said man looked to have been on the wrong end of an earth jutsu. His clothes were torn and covered in dirt, with the only clothing that wasn't damaged being the mist headband on that was on his head. The prisoner was also covered in a number of injuries, with both of his eyes blackened and swollen shut and several of his yellow teeth missing. However, other than his sorry state, there was nothing much else about him that would make him stand out in a crowd. He had short brown hair and brown eyes. He was neither muscled nor skinny. In fact, looking at him, everything about the man just seemed plain and bland. Naruto stayed back in the shadows as the three adults moved to stand in front of the Mist Nin, choosing to remain unseen for the moment as he instead just watched the proceedings. The moment the prisoner saw them, the Mist Nin's battered face twisted into a sneer, and he tried lean back and spit at Mei, only to fail and have it fall in a dribble down his chin. "Fucking freaks, I'm not saying anything to you creatures. I'll die before I talk." The man snarled out, his speech slightly garbled by his injuries, but his words still quite understandable to everyone in the room. What wasn't understandable, however, was who he was speaking to. Was he speaking to the bloodline users or the outcasts? Naruto didn't know if there could have been a better moment for him to make himself known, and smirked under his mask as he stepped forward to stand between Mei and Furue. "That can be arranged. I'm hungry." As intimidating lines go, it was probably a good one, or at least it would have if it did not come out of the mouth of a 10-year-old who was wearing a mask that looked more clownish than intimidating. For all of 3 seconds after he moved forward to reveal himself, there was silence, before it was broken by the Mist Nin suddenly bursting out into insane laughter as he looked at the short figure of Naruto. "Ha ha ha. Are you kidding me? You're getting a brat to interrogate me now? Ha ha ha." the man shouted, his strained and high-pitched voice carrying slight, as he continued to guffaw, or at least as much as was possible while being tied to a chair. Instead of answering the man, and before anyone else could do anything, Naruto pulled out the knife he had got from Itachi, and with a step forward and a single arm movement he used it to slash the Mist Nin's throat. There was a spray of blood from the cut, as instead of being a precise cut aimed at making a kill as clean as possible that he had instead just slashed the man. The blood that sprayed out of the man's now gaping neck covered Naruto, the blood hitting his mask and dripping down it. The ghastly sight certainly made Naruto's mask look more intimidating. But Naruto ignored the blood as it dripped down from his mask and soaked into his coat. Instead, he just wiped the blood off his knife and returned it to his sheath, acting as if nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened. With Mei. Wait. The only thing that stopped Mei or Ao from jumping forward when they saw the boy pull out his knife was Furue holding out his arm and telling them to wait. Torture was a common practice in the elemental nations, a necessary evil. In fact, before hearing that Furue had returned, they had been beating the Mist Nin in an attempt to get him to talk, though with little success. Shinobi were conditioned, after all, to resist torture, which made breaking them and getting information very difficult, and any information they did get was always suspect as it could just be made up. This was why, upon hearing of the return of Furue to the camp, Mei had put the interrogation on hold so that he could lend his assistance to the task. Mei didn't like the idea of a child being involved with an interrogation, or war in general for that matter. The only reason she had agreed to allow him to come now was because she trusted Furue, and if the man claimed the boy had skills that could help them, then she was willing to give it a try. After all, they were in the middle of a civil war with their home village, a war against the tyranny of the Mizuki Jigura and his targeting and purging of the shinobi bloodlines in the Land of Water. But even if she did allow him to be here, she certainly didn't expect him to just kill the man. You couldn't get information from the dead after all.
Mei was one of a growing number of the rebels who had no issues with the lone Nin, or as she had learned they preferred to be called, the outcasts. While she, like many others, held fear of what several of them could do, she understood that it would be hypocritical of her to hate them while fighting a war against a madman trying to kill them for having bloodline limits. It was an opinion a large proportion of the rebels had. After all, as the war stretched on and they continued to work more closely with the outcasts, bonds of comradeship had begun to form, and the hypocrisy of their hate had begun to become clear to them. Though honestly, although she accepted them, she was still somewhat unnerved by some of them, but even so Mei made the effort not to judge, something she knew more and more of her commanders and soldiers were also starting to do. But even then, not all of the outcasts had originally been hated for what they could do, but because of their refusal to join any of the hidden villages. Many of the rogue clans that had originally been refused when the hidden villages were first formed had simply been misunderstood, most not knowing about the intricacies of their abilities at the time. The people setting up villages had been looking for perfection, and anyone that seemed to be anything less than perfect were not welcome, as they were thought of as dead weight. Such as the Kadain clan, who had been rejected for the flaw of having bad eyesight up close. All it took is a special pair of glasses, and they were no different than any other ninja that needed glasses, but the short-sightedness of the shinobi of old had blinded them to the potential of many such clans. By the time any of the hidden villages realized their mistake, it was too late, and none of the outcasts wanted anything to do with the people that had rejected them. Then there were the clans and shinobi that refused to join any village from the beginning, which just left a bad taste in many mouths. Mei wasn't even sure if people remembered why they had originally started hating the outcasts anymore. Which is why she had taken the time to get to know them as humans, learning about who they were and what they could do as she did so. Unfortunately, some people weren't too happy about this, which had forced her to set up strict rules to prevent some of her own people rebelling against her out of spite. She couldn't risk anyone from either side acting out against the other, so tried to keep them separated as much as possible. After the war was over, when the need for soldiers and strict order was not as necessary, she could change the rules. But for now it was for the best to keep them separated. that way there would be no distractions caused by the more prejudiced members of the rebellion. May was well aware that as things were at the moment the outcasts were the only thing keeping them going at this point in the war, they were simply too outnumbered and outgunned to fight Yagura without their help. This reliance on the outcasts was part of the reason some of the more hot-tempered members of the rebellion were being so hostile. The way they saw it, this was a rebellion that should be fought and won by mist shinobi, and as such they were only tolerant of the outcasts so long as they proved to be useful regularly. The others though were thankful for the help, but due to the tension of the issue were not comfortable bringing it up. As it was, their rebellion had begun gaining more traction, as more and more outcasts and rebel mist shinobi joined the cause. Gritting her teeth and aiming a slight glare at the old man, May tried to ignore the voice in her head telling her to just push past him. The only thing that's stopping her being the respect he had earned, though her patience was wearing thin. He just killed our prisoner before we could even get any information out of him. May said, her anger rising as she glared at Furue, forgetting momentarily that the old man didn't actually have any eyes. The response May wasn't expecting was for the old man to let a light chuckle escape lips at her words, even as he slowly and carefully placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. His tone warm as he spoke in response to her anger. "My dear, I can tell you now that death is only the beginning when it comes this young man here." May had no idea what that meant. However, when she finally turned her attention back to the boy, May felt her mind come to a stop, her eyes widening in shock as she saw what he was doing with Naruto. Naruto would have liked to have given the man a quicker death, but he wasn't sure if he was strong enough to stab through his chest and into the heart. There was the brain, but if he hit the wrong spot it could also make it more painful, so instead he had gone with the only choice he was sure would work. A slash to the throat. He was sure it would be quick, but what he didn't know was that it would be so messy. Naruto took no joy in slow deaths, even for enemies like he was sure this Mist Nin was. If they deserved a slow and painful death, then he knew that you would take care of them when they came to him. His counterpart being much more sadistic than him, Naruto saw no reason to make it harder. Of course that is only for the souls that he devours. What happens to those that go to the actual Shinigami he really did not want to know. He could hear Furue and the other two adults behind him talking, but Naruto didn't listen to them. He was putting all his focus on the dying man in front of him, making sure he was watching as the light left his eyes. No matter what the man had done in his life, Naruto felt it important that he at the very least acknowledged his passing, especially when he was the one that ended the man's life. And then there it was, a soul forming in front of him above the man's chests. It was smaller than he was expecting, and from what he could see more than half of it was covered in black spots. The black spots that he had come to realize meant corruption of one's soul. Slowly he put his hand out, channeling chakra into it. As he did so, reaching out, Naruto grabbed the soul and turned to the three remaining adults in the tent with him. He wanted May and the man with the eye patch to see what he was holding, and what he was going to do with it. The moment he saw both their eyes widen in shock and confusion as they saw what was in his hand, Naruto opened his mouth wide and pushed the soul into his gaping maw. As he felt the soul going down his throat and being absorbed by his body, he once again felt that rush of energy and the rapid flashing images that momentarily appeared in his head. He then closed his eyes and took a moment to concentrate, his body thrumming pleasantly with the added power he had just acquired. Naruto and Yu had found that they were able to talk without Naruto needing to enter his mind, but neither was as used to it. It shouldn't have really been surprising that they could communicate like this. After all, they were two personalities that shared the same soul and body. 5 minutes of concentration later, Naruto opened his eyes and without a word or glance at the others in the tent walked over to the table and started writing down everything he now knew, though he didn't write down the jutsu. After all, that information might be more useful later, so he would write them down in private. You had gotten the information to him quite easily, the boy taking time out of whatever it is he usually did to sort through the 2 months' worth of memories they had just acquired from the Mist Shinobi. absorbing his thoughts, feelings etc. Though you did take it upon himself to remove one or two of the more unpleasant memories and discard them, after all the memory of murdering a baby was not something anyone should see. What was that? Mei asked as Naruto turned away from the table where he had just written down what he had found out from the man. Just my bloodline, Naruto replied calmly, his tone firm as he refused to say any more than that. And just what is your bloodline? Ao, the man with the eye patch inquired, his tone a lot more rattled than Mei's as he showed how clearly unnerved he was by Naruto's ability. I have the ability to see people's memories. Naruto replied, deciding that using a half-truth to explain away his particular skill set may be better than lying. Already he was regretting making such a show out of it. The thing he had told them was an aspect of his ability and so it was not a lie, however judging from the expressions on their faces they knew it was not the full truth. It took another 2 hours before Naruto and Furue were allowed to leave, though Mei and the eye-patched man still weren't happy to let them go. They both had wanted to know just what Naruto had done and how he was able to see the enemy shinobi's memories, but neither the blonde nor Furue would answer anything but the basics and eventually they had no other choice but to let them leave. They had the information they wanted, though Naruto was sure they would be checking it several times before they trusted him. If nothing else, Naruto had proved he was useful for now, even if what he could do clearly made people uncomfortable. The eye-patch man led them out of the camp this time, leaving them the moment they reached the edge and pointing them towards where the outcasts had set up their camp. The first thing that Naruto noticed when they got closer to the outcast camp was just how different it looked to the rebellion camp. Where the rebels had arranged everything perfectly military and uniform, the outcasts' camp looked like a mixture of different camps that had been clumsily pushed together. Few tents looked the same, all different styles, sizes and shapes. But even the ones that did look the same weren't together, they were all spread out in a seemingly random pattern. But the moment Furue led him into the actual camp itself, Naruto couldn't help but stare in amazement at the people walking around and between the tents. As they passed a dark purple tent, Naruto saw a man sitting outside on the ground that seemed to have fallen asleep. The man had dark skin and coppery-colored hair. Naruto saw 2 women and 3 children all dressed in animal skins with the head of said animals acting as hoods/masks with their green eyes glinting slightly in darkness as night crept in. The small family was all crouched around a roaring fire pit, with any exposed skin they had covered in white paint. All but one of them was wearing a wolf skin, with the exception being one of the women who was wearing what looked like a bear skin. As Furue saw him glancing in their direction, he explained that they were the Nabra clan, a clan of skin changers, who were able to use the skins of animals to turn into said animals. But not in the way of a henge, they were able to physically wear the hide like a second skin. They were a clan famed for their infiltration and assassination abilities, but who were feared for the macabre nature of their ability. Carrying on through the camp, Naruto also saw his traveling companion Kaijin standing outside a very large brown tent with a woman the blonde could only assume was his wife and several other members of his clan. Like Kaijin, they all seemed to wear the bare minimum amount of clothing, and their bodies were covered in tribal tattoos. Though Naruto did notice that one of the men's tattoos was brown and another's tattoos were blue for some reason instead of red like Kaijin's. As he continued on through the outcast camp, he also saw several members of Shappu's clan as well, all who had their bows and arrows close by and at the ready. They passed one tent that looked like it had been made into a blacksmith, with a furnace built outside that was being constantly fed to keep it hot. Naruto was a little surprised to see a group of 10 men moving around it at a fast pace, yet not getting in any of the others' way. To Naruto they looked to be moving in perfect synchronicity. However, the most surprising thing about it though, was the fact that all the men couldn't have been taller than 3 foot at the most, with several of the men being even shorter than that. He didn't even need to look Furue's way to get an explanation from the old man this time. He explained that they were members of the Gungnir clan, a clan which produced masters of craftsmanship, with the weapons they produce being known as some of the finest in the land, beyond even weapons from the land of iron in terms of quality and strength. Unfortunately, though, their clan was rejected entrance into the Hidden Cloud village during the formation of the villages. Apparently the fact that every member of the clan always suffered from dwarfism was enough of a turn-off for the clan to be refused entrance. Even while living in the Hidden Leaf, Naruto had never seen so many different people in one place, and based on the way they were all interacting and greeting each other, everyone got along just fine. Hardly anyone even turned to look in their direction as they passed other than to wave at Furue before going back to whatever it was they were doing before, barely even glancing at Naruto as he walked along besides Furue. There was also an air of calmness that wasn't felt at the rebel camp, where there seemed to be a constant tension in the air. Naruto found that he liked the more chilled-out atmosphere of the outcast camp than the more rigid atmosphere of the rebel camp. "Hey! What took you so long?" a voice said, suddenly interrupting Naruto from his thoughts. Jumping slightly as he was brought out of his thoughts, Naruto turned to see Victor waving at him from a tent in front of them with his usual insane grin on his face. The tent itself actually made Naruto think of his friend in that it looked to have been patched together out of several different tents, and not all of them were the same color. However, the thing that really caught Naruto's attention was the woman next to Victor and the thing that stood next to her. It had the basic shape of a man, though it was twice the size of Kyojin in both height and width. It was wearing clothes that, just like the tent they were stood in front of, were patched together, only without sleeves, most likely because no one would make clothes for something that size. Its skin was a dull gray color and had more scars than even Victor, and its head looked a little too small for the rest of its body. It was also bald, though that was mostly because its head looked like it was made of metal with the skin bolted to it in several places. Its arms were also too long, even though they were just as muscular as the rest of its body, with a pair of giant bolts sticking out of its shoulders, and the way it stood made it look to have the posture of a gorilla, with its arms being used to walk more than its legs. Instead of hands, the thing had blade-like appendages grafted onto its limbs. Overall, it looked more like a zombie than Victor, as it looked like it had been made from several different bodies being sewn together. To Naruto, who was probably not even 5 feet tall, the monstrous 12, almost 13-foot abomination was absolutely terrifying. The woman Naruto, strangely enough, was relieved to find looked more like Victor, including the scars and wiry gray hair that was sticking up in every direction while still falling to her shoulders. She looked older than Victor, probably in her mid-20s, and just like his friend, she wore a patchwork lab coat, and she even had a similar-looking shovel on her back just like his friend. However, the thing that really stood out about the woman was her right hand. It looked to be made of metal and was several sizes too big compared to the rest of her body. Instead of fingers, Naruto saw what looked like giant needles that could have been used as senbon, and he also noticed that there was ninja wire running up from each finger into her sleeve. Looking at it closely, it looked like a more sophisticated version of Victor's weaponized bracers. Though also for some reason Naruto couldn't help but be reminded of a sewing machine as he looked at it.
As they got closer, Victor came running up to Naruto, the woman following along behind him at a slower pace, while the giant thing stayed behind and stared off into space with a blank look on its face. When the two were standing in front of him, Victor was practically bouncing in place as he pointed to the woman. "This is my third cousin Gakkai, on my dad's left big toe's side, I think, something like that, or was it on my arm's mother's side? Anyway, Gakkai, this is the friend I was telling you about, you know, the one that eats souls. I still don't have a name for him though." Naruto ignored the pointed look Victor sent him with the last comment and took the hand Gakkai offered him in a firm shake, thankful that it was her more normal left hand. Now that she was closer, Naruto also noticed that she lacked the slightly maniacal gleam that Victor had in his eyes. Instead, she looked more calculating, only without any coldness. "Nice to meet you, hope Victor isn't being too much trouble," the woman said, her soft smoky voice at odds with her flamboyant appearance. Naruto could only give her a blank expression that could even be seen through his mask, making Gakkai give a quiet sigh before noticing that the giant was still by the tent. Turning around with a frown, she shouted out in a slightly louder voice that probably only just carried over to the monstrous thing. "Hey Chunk, get your arse over here." The moment Gakkai spoke, the now identified Chunk started slowly moving towards them, each step making a loud thud and leaving an indent in the ground, the beast making strange groaning noises as it moved. It came to a stop right behind the gray-haired woman, but didn't say anything. After a moment he opened his mouth, but instead of speaking, a large glob of drool dripped out and fell right on top of Gakkai's head. "Chunk, what the hell? I told you to stop doing that. This is the third time today and I am tired of washing my hair every few minutes." The woman set her face screw up in irritation as she gave the beast a light punch to the thigh, which was incidentally the highest point the woman could reach on the beast. Naruto blinked slightly in surprise at seeing what had just happened, before a look of understanding crossed his masked face. Well, that explained her hair, Naruto thought in amusement. Blinking as he watched the older woman start yelling at the giant Chunk, Naruto turned to Victor only to see him giggling behind his hands. "What the hell is that thing? Who Chunk?" "He's one of Gakkai's corpse dolls, or as they are sometimes called, abominations. It's one of my clan's unique bloodline jutsu. Basically you build a body out of spare parts, then use a fuckload of lightning chakra to give it a jumpstart. They aren't the smartest and it would be an insult to Wood to say they were as dumb as it, but if you know what you're doing they are strong and come in handy." Naruto wasn't sure what to think about that, though when he turned back to look at Gakkai, only to see her still yelling at Chunk for drooling on her head, he couldn't stop the sweat drop from running down the back of his head. Looking more closely, Naruto used the ability he had decided to call his death sense. As he used it he could feel the souls and life force of everything around him. Looking at the hulking Chunk he could see that it contained life, but upon closer examination he could see nothing resembling a soul contained within it. Blinking, Naruto stopped using his sensory ability and instead looked at the monstrosity before him in shock. He had never before seen a living being without a soul, and he was glad, as for someone like Naruto it was incredibly unnerving. Eventually deciding to just ignore it for now, Naruto turned back to Furue, who had been standing quietly for the last few minutes with a smile on his face, as he watched the ongoing shenanigans of the outcasts, new and old, occasionally chuckling in amusement as he heard Gakkai's smoky voice raised in annoyance as she shouted at the oblivious Chunk. "So, Furue, where can I set up my tent? I have one stored in a ceiling scroll, so I just need to set it up and I'm good." Naruto said, a slightly nervous note in his voice as he saw Furue turn to look at him. It wasn't Furue that made him nervous, no, his nervousness was caused by the potential that he might be rejected. The old man took a moment to think about it, before nodding to himself and walking off in a seemingly random direction, Naruto following along behind him. If I remember correctly, there is a space between Hadan and Clementine's tents in the northern section of the camp. I'm sure you will be able to get along just fine with both, though I should warn you Hadan is also known as Cannonball around here, and Clementine, well, you'll see. Not sure he understood, but still willing to follow, Naruto gave a quick wave to Victor, who would no doubt be staying with his clansmen, one of the few dozen left in existence, or at least that was what Victor had said. With a quick shout of "see you later" to Victor, Naruto turned on his heel and ran to catch up with the surprisingly spry old blind man. As the night began to close in and the sky became darker and darker, Furue led Naruto to the other side of the camp where he would be living for the foreseeable future. The old man soon came to a stop just in front of two tents that had what looked like a decent-sized gap between them. The tent of the right looked normal enough and was made from a plain brown material, though there were a number of dark stains on the fabric. The tent looked like it could hold at least 5 people with ease. There was also a foot-wide pole stuck into the ground that reached high into the air, easily higher than any of the tents in the camp. It was a large contrast to the tent on the left, which looked to have been patched back together even more times than Gakkai's tent had been. Before Naruto could even think to comment on either, however, Furue grabbed his shoulder in a tight grip and pulled him 3 steps to the right. Bang! This action was soon followed by a loud banging sound. The sound was soon followed by a fast-moving something that came shooting out of the tent on the left at high speeds and right through the space where Naruto had previously been stood. The blur carried on and cut through 3 other tents, much to the annoyance of the owners of said tents, before a member of the Okarimashita clan, a great beast of a man with a bald head and brown tattoos, moved to stand in its way and used his own body to bring it to a stop. As the man took a step forward, the brown tattoos on his body began to glow. This was soon followed by the earth around him lifting into the air and covering his body like a second skin. His earth armor in place, the man reached forward to stop the swiftly moving blur. Catching it in his arms, he was pushed back about a foot, but no more than that before the blur fell to the ground with a groan. Now that it had stopped moving, Naruto could see that the blur had actually been a guy in his mid-teens, who was slowly pulling himself up, a sheepish expression on his face as he started apologizing to everyone around him. The teen looked to be of around average height for his age, with a lean build that was normal for a shinobi. He was dressed in a black jumpsuit that looked to have extra padding on the outside, with a pair of fingerless gloves that seemed to be attached to the jumpsuit. Naruto also noticed that the boy was wearing boots instead of shinobi sandals, and that the boots the teen was wearing were huge and looked to be coated in metal. His strange ensemble was finished off by a metal helmet he wore on his head. There was also a pair of tinted goggles that covered his eyes, and the beginning of a beard on his lower face. That's Hadan, and like I said, he is better known as Cannonball. He's not actually part of a rogue clan, but instead he is from a small village in Earth Country. From what I understand, he was asked to leave after knocking down a few houses because of his ability. It got to the point that he had to make a run for the border before the hidden rock could take him. Naruto listened to Furue as the old man talked, his eyes on the now named Hadan as he watched the teen starting to help to fix the tents he had knocked over while continually apologizing over and over to anyone who would listen. What was that exactly? I've never heard of anything like that happening. Naruto asked, his forehead scrunched in confusion as he tried to work out just what the boy's ability was. He had already seen the results of the Cannonball's ability, now he just wanted to know what it actually was. And before meeting you, I had never heard of someone that could eat souls. Things like this happen more often than people think. New jutsu are created through trial and error or even accident. New bloodlines can appear randomly, going unnoticed for years. Eventually most find their way to outcast camps like this, the same way you yourself did. It's no secret that the hidden villages across the elemental nations have a habit of trying to collect people like that, many becoming breeding stock or worse. Naruto wasn't sure what to think to this news, being the son of the Hokage. He knew there were parts of the job his father never talked to them about, but Naruto just couldn't even imagine his father ordering something like that. But then again, how many times had he heard Minato talking about needing to put the needs of the village above all else? It had become a saying he would use when trying to explain why he had done something. Suddenly feeling very uncomfortable, Naruto turned back to the empty plot between the 2 tents and pulled out his sealing scroll. Furue said a quick goodbye before walking off, telling him that if he needed anything to come and ask before disappearing between the tents. He had just finished organizing everything ready to put the tent up when a voice to his right caught his attention. Not enough one, why must that old man keep sending brats in my direction? I mean, first it was that rockhead Hadan, and now it is some little kid wearing a clown mask. A voice said, interrupting Naruto from what he had been about to do. Turning around, Naruto caught sight of the speaker. In front of him was a young blonde-haired girl that looked around Naruto's own age. The girl was a slim with shoulder-length blonde hair and pink eyes. The most unnerving thing about the girl, though, was the look on her face as she spoke. It was the kind of look a predator would give her prey. Hey, come on now, don't be so harsh to the new kid, Hadan said as he approached, a wary look on his face as he looked at the blonde girl. As the boy came closer, more of his feature began to stick out. He had removed his helmet to show he had short brown hair that already looked as if it was beginning to thin. He also had brown eyes that at this moment were switching back and forth between looking at Naruto in concern and at the girl in slight fear. Did it look like I was talking to you, Boulder Brain? The girl snapped as she turned to face Hogan, the smile on her face if anything getting bigger, which only seemed to unnerve the older boy more. Come on Clementine Iwa. The boy began to say as he backtracked slightly. Looking around, Naruto noticed that a small crowd of outcasts were beginning to form to watch the entertainment. Before the boy could finish what he was about to say, he was interrupted by the girl, who in a rapid blur of motion appeared right in front of Hogan, a look of anger now on her face, with what had once been a pleasant smile turning into a malicious smirk. Moving almost too fast for Naruto to see, the blonde girl drove a fist into the older boy's gut. Now in normal circumstances, the idea of a little girl doing that to a boy twice her size would be laughable. Unfortunately for Hogan, these were not normal circumstances, as with slight choking sound the boy had the breath knocked out of him and collapsed onto the floor. The reaction this received from the crowd was one of amusement as they cheered the younger girl on. Some part of Naruto thought that they might still be pissed off about their damaged tents. I've told you before, and I will tell you again, Boulder Face. The name is Lady Clementine, the inhuman Lady Clementine. The girl said grandly as she bowed slightly to the crowd, gaining a few chuckles and cheers from the crowd as she did so. Sorry, Lady Clementine. Hogan gasped out from where he lying on the floor in a fetal position. You are forgiven, I suppose. The girl Clementine said before she turned back around to face Naruto, her pink eyes gleaming slightly as they caught the light from one of the nearby fires. So short, skinny, and ugly, who are you? Hearing that, Naruto blinked slightly in confusion, getting to his feet so he faced the girl. Naruto pulled down his hood, revealing his pale blonde hair and the mask that concealed his face. Oh, I see, so you're not just ugly. The girl said, gesturing to his mask. Naruto gave a nod of his head whilst opening his mouth to confirm what she was about to say, only for him to be taken aback by what the girl said next. You're so ugly you have to actually wear a mask to hide your hideousness from the world. Blinking slightly as he heard that, Naruto replied before fully thinking through what he was going to say. You're kind of a bitch, aren't you? Bang! Naruto hit the floor gasping for breath as all the air was taken out of his lungs, the little blonde-haired girl having just landed a punch to his gut that knocked him to the ground. But his condition didn't last long as he felt the chakra from the souls he had consumed burning in his veins. He could feel his adrenaline pumping as his system was flooded by chakra. His first thought when he felt this is that he had somehow done this unconsciously, but that thought was soon put to rest when he heard the soft voice of you in his head. Come on Naruto, kick this bitch's arse. Pushing himself to his feet, Naruto was able to see the surprise on Clementine's face before he charged her, aiming to tackle her to the ground. Only to receive a boot in the face as the girl leapt back a step before kicking forward, taking advantage of Naruto's uncoordinated attack. Once again Naruto hit the floor, but unlike last time, though, he didn't stay down long as he hit the ground in a roll and made his way back to his feet, thrusting his arm out in the direction of Clementine as he did so. What happened next truly surprised Naruto. A chain-like construct made of pure chakra erupted from Naruto's hand. It was reminiscent of the chakra chains he had seen his sister and mother make, only his was made up of his unique grayish chakra. Naruto, it appeared, wasn't the only one taken aback by the chain's appearance, as Clementine too was shocked. So much so that she didn't even try to dodge as the chain came swinging at her, catching her in the midsection as it catapulted her a few meters back. Arg! Damn it, that hurts like a bitch! Clementine shouted as she got back onto her feet, her pink eyes lock on Naruto as he too was on his feet, now facing her. You can make a weird chain thing. That's not fair. As she said that, she broke eye contact with the blonde opposite her and looked down at where the chain had struck her. The parts of her shirt that had been touched by the gray chakra was gone, the edges of the fabric showing that it had rotted away. The flesh beneath though looked like it had also started rotting, as it had become dry and gray, the skin already falling off to show the decaying muscle beneath. Instead of looking horrified or angry about it though, Clementine let out a loud cackle of laughter. Looking down once more, she could see one of the aspects of her bloodline were already at work. The flesh had begun to regenerate, the new flesh driving back the rot that had been caused by that chain-like chakra construct. Looking up, she could see the boy's eyes behind the mask. The scara had turned black and the irises had turned crimson. What was more noticeable about them, though, was that they were widened in surprise. as though the boy had no idea how he had just done what he had done. Jumping up and down slightly in excitement now that her previously festering wound had been healed, the blonde girl sent the masked boy a feral grin. "Finally a kid my own age that can fight back. So what's your name then, kid? Or should I just keep calling you ugly?" As Naruto heard what Clementine had just said, he had to blink in surprise. After what had just happened to her, he thought that she would either be crying or raging, but instead she seemed happy. His surprise, however, only lasted until he heard what she called him. It seemed she recovered from that really painful-looking and borderline life-threatening wound very quickly. Looking up, he looked her dead in the eye. Seeing the hidden glee contained within, he decided to say the first thing that came to mind. "My name is Pain, bitch."
3 years later. It had been 3 years, Naruto thought to himself as he walked through the winding streets of Kirigakure. 3 years since he had fled his home in the night, fled like some kind of criminal. 3 years since he had come across Victor, the bizarre boy who would later become one of his closest friends. 3 years since he had come to the Land of Water to join the rogue clans in fighting alongside the rebels in the Kiri Civil War. In those 3 years, Naruto had changed a lot, so much so that he doubted anyone would recognize him as the frail boy who had first arrived at the camp. He now stood at just less than 5 foot 10 inches, with broad shoulders and muscled arms. His previously spiky hair was now cropped very short. After all, having long hair in a fight was just stupid in his mind. It just gave the enemy something else to grab onto. His skin was still pale, but no longer an unhealthy shade. Instead, it just looked like he hadn't been in the sun enough, which, considering the climate of water country, was relatively true. Also gone was his mask. The crude thing had been destroyed by Clementine in one of their many spars. Instead, he kept his face bare, no longer caring to hide it behind some mask when he was in Kirigakure, his home. Luckily, though, he no longer resembled his father as much, with his hair cropped and his face slightly fuller and rounder, no doubt due to his mother's genes. The resemblance was no longer so close. Which, when added to his eyes, which now had constantly black sclera and crimson-red irises, made him look completely different. In Naruto's mind, this was what he looked like. He saw no point in hiding it anymore, not now he had found happiness in his new home. What had also changed was his style. He now wore a pair of standard shinobi sandals with mottled gray and black shinobi combat pants, specifically designed for him. On his chest he had a mesh shirt and an open gray waistcoat. On each of his wrists was a tattooed kanji, a permanent storage seal on each of his wrists that made the need for pouches or pockets pointless. Thinking back on the last 3 years, Naruto could not think of one thing he would do differently. When he thought of what his life would have been like, either trapped or isolated in Konoha, never allowed to be a shinobi, or dissected in some laboratory. His body dissected to try and see how his abilities work. No, he was far happy where he was. His life before in Konoha was now nothing more than a distant memory, becoming more and more distant every day. The last 3 years for Naruto had been quite fun, all things considered. The war in Kiri had ended within a year of his arrival. Not that he played that much of a part in any of the fighting. No, despite his unique abilities, he was still just an untrained kid in the rebels' eyes. He, along with Clementine and the other kids at the camp, had mostly played minor roles in the war. They had run messages sometimes through enemy territory. They had acted as support for the main forces, going in after to clean up the remaining existence, with some of the more unique outcasts like Naruto taking advantage of the opportunity. Naruto had tended to gorge himself on the souls left over from the multiple skirmishes and battles that occurred throughout the Kiri Civil War. He had managed to find his niche in their society, where some like Victor collect organs and limbs from the fallen to act as replacements, and others like Clementine ate the flesh of the dead, a rather grim aspect of her own Kekkei Genkai. Naruto was the only one who devoured their souls. This meant he had an endless supply to eat, an all-you-can-eat buffet.
Of course, this was not free. He had to do his part. This for Naruto meant more than just running errands and acting as support for the main force. No, thanks to his unique abilities, he was the rebels' main interrogator, drafted in along with Furue to find out the enemy's secrets. How he did this was a secret known only to a few, including Mei Terumi, the new Mizukage, and his closest companions, Victor and Clementine. Letting out another sigh as he felt the rain patter down around him, joined the constant fog that surrounded this land in soaking him to the bone. Naruto continued to think about the past. With Naruto's help in extracting information, the tides of war soon turned as the Loyalists soon found that their operatives could no longer hide their secrets. Panic had begun to spread as the rebels now seemed to know their every move, their chain of hierarchy, and even their hidden bases. This panic had turned into fear and suspicion as the Loyalists began to believe they had a traitor in their midst. The rebels took advantage of this and soon began to drive the Loyalists back, working in tandem with the rogue clans to push the enemy back. Victory had not just become possible for the rebel forces, it had become likely, and Naruto had played a big role in this. Not through the traditional method of combat, though he did fight even if it was just in support of the main forces. No, Naruto aided the rebel forces to victory through providing information, and in the end it was which side had the best information that won the war, not which side had the flashiest jutsu or the largest army. Hundreds, maybe thousands died in battle during the war, mostly the Loyalists, but also many outcasts and rebels died, giving their lives on the same battlefield for their comrades and for victory. Some good did come from this though, as bonds soon began to form between the rebels and the outcasts. Bonds formed through mutual understanding of what it meant to be persecuted for having a bloodline. Bonds formed on the battlefield through sacrifice and bloodshed. What also helped was the fact that the less liberal members of Kiri were Loyalists, and these people were getting butchered by the united front of the outcasts and rebels. With the strongest voices against the outcasts lying dead in the ground, it was no real surprise that after the war ended an agreement was made with the outcasts. An agreement that the outcasts who fought in the war were invited to join Kiri, offered funding and aid in establishing their own clans and clan compounds within the village. Most accepted. After all, they had lived by the code that there was always safety in numbers, and so as a black almost 90% of the outcasts joined Kiri. It wasn't an entirely one-sided deal though, as Mei had made the offer for a reason when she had been named Mizukage after the fourth Mizukage was deposed. After years of brutal war and purges, the population of Kiri was almost halved, with multiple clans and bloodlines either extinct or on the verge of extinction. Kirigakure was on the verge of collapse, with it being very likely that the village would just die or become a second-rate minor village. That was of course until Mei made her offer, at which point the beleaguered population of Kiri doubled, with new and unique bloodlines flooding in. This led to the shinobi of Kirigakure being happy that their village would not only survive but also come out of this possibly stronger. And it also led to the outcasts being happy. After all, they now had the support and protection of a shinobi village, a village in which they had nearly a majority in. This opened up opportunities for them to lay down roots and create a proper society. There was of course some opposition, with some shinobi looking down on the outcasts or not wanting them there at all. Of course they tended to be in the minority and were quickly stamped out. After all, having just come out of a brutal war over the subjugation of bloodlines, that kind of thinking was not welcomed. In a way it could almost be seen as overcorrection. Having just come out of the war, the shinobi took things like prejudice to the other extreme, welcoming in a number of new clans that had not been invited into shinobi villages for a reason. These problems were soon solved however by the new shinobi council that was formed to advise the young Mizukage Mei. A council made up of both former outcasts and former rebels, giving a voice to all residents of Kiri. Naruto snorted to himself at that. Thinking about it like that always made it all seem so grand and simple. Unfortunately though, it was not even now. 2 years later there were still tensions, still division. Although most of the shinobi had now just accepted it and some even welcomed it, shinobi being a pretty adaptable. The civilians in the village were not so welcoming. Some shops refused to serve former outcasts, as to, did some of the bars not let them in. However, at the same time establishments run by former outcasts did not allow civilians in, so it was not a one-sided thing. It was towards one such bar that Naruto was now heading, looking to meet up with some friends and also get out of the damp Kiri climate. The bar he was headed to was a particularly grim one called the Poisoned Rat. It was a regular haunt of his, Naruto having taken a liking to it due to its rough atmosphere. Approaching it, Naruto grinned slightly as he saw a reddish puddle just in front of the door. Looks like some unfortunate fucker picked a fight with the wrong person. Naruto thought to himself as he stepped over the bloody puddle and into the noisy and sweaty bar. As he did so, Naruto looked around, his tongue flicking out of his mouth and wetting his lips as he did so. "Well, look who it is!" A voice called out over the noise of the laughing and shouting patrons of the bar. "If it isn't that fucker, Pain." Some of the drunken shinobi cheered at that, the alcohol slopping out of their mugs and onto the dirt floor as they did so. Others, however, gained distinctly uncomfortable looks, back away from him as they did so. "Mina. A doll as always." Naruto called out to the woman who hailed him. Her name was Mina. She was a small childlike woman with bright white hair and twinkling crimson eyes. At first appearances she looked like a little girl, easily able to pass for a child of maybe 8 or 9. In reality, though, she was a woman in her 60s, a former outcast who, like Naruto, did gain a unique bloodline or ability that caused her to leave her home. Where that home was or how her ability manifested, Naruto had no idea. He only knew what she had told him, and she was never the most open of people, and Naruto knew enough about her to know that pushing for more information from her would likely be fatal. As despite her innocent and childlike appearance, Mina was not only deadly but also a massive bitch. She was a sadist who took pleasure in other people's misery. Her unique ability allowed her to feed off of another's life energy. All she needed was to touch you and she would suck you dry, and not in the fun way. This was how she maintained her youthful appearance. She was a parasite who fed off of others. The stolen life force also healed her of any damage she might receive, which made her pretty much immortal. Her other shinobi abilities and fighting skills were no better than a Chunin's, but that did not really matter considering she only needed one touch to drain someone of their life. "Oh, you sure do know how to be charming, don't you, Pain?" Mina replied coyly, a slight flush on her cheeks as she looked shyly away. It was all an act, of course, an act to make people let down their guards or underestimate her. But for Naruto, who had seen what she was capable of, it would never work. She may be sweet and innocent on the outside, but on the inside she was a monster. "Your little friends are all by the bar, go have a drink on the house," Mina replied as she gestured across the crowded room and towards the bar. "Thanks, Mina," Naruto replied with a wink as he walked past the table she was sat at, a number of laughing and drinking men around her, men who were probably going to wake up tomorrow unable to move after having most of the life drained from them. Like he said, she was a bitch. "Anytime, honey," Mina called back before looking away, her eyes wide and glistening as she innocently looked up at the big men around her. "So can any of you help me find my mummy?" was the last thing Naruto heard her say before he was swallowed up by the crowd. Walking through the bar, Naruto couldn't help but grin as he saw how people got out of his way. Some out of respect, his contributions in the war having not been kept a secret, even if his methods of interrogation and spying were left to speculation. Others, however, got out of his way because they were scared, embarrassing as being scared of a 14-year-old. Maybe it was not unwarranted. This was due to what Naruto's current job was. Naruto was one of Kiri's hunter nins, a shinobi who hunts down and kills other rogue shinobi. It was a job that Naruto did alongside 2 others, Clementine and Victor. Together they made up one of Kiri's most feared hunting teams, the Ghouls. A team perfectly equipped for hunting down and butchering rogue shinobi and then completely disposing of the remains. This was helped by all of their individual abilities. Clementine's bloodline gave her enhanced strength, speed, reflexes, durability and senses. This, along with her regeneration and her unique chakra, made her the perfect hunter. The downside of her bloodline, though, was that the changes to her body meant she had to use more energy, which meant she had to eat more than a normal person would. This alone would not be a downside, but that wasn't all. Due to her altered body, she was unable to eat normal food. In fact, doing so made her sick. The only thing Clementine could eat without throwing up was flesh, and not just any but human flesh. Her bloodline had made her the perfect predator. Unfortunately, though, it had made humans her perfect prey. This downside of her bloodline was what had led to her and her clan being excluded from the shinobi villages. It had also led to many of her kind being hunted down and killed. This was mostly their own faults for giving into their hunger and feasting on humans without restraint. Clementine though was smarter than that. She restricted her prey to those outside of her village, taking on the position of being a hunter-nin as it fit well with her natural skills of hunting and killing humans, and also gave her an endless supply of fresh meat. Victor too was also uniquely adapted to being a hunter-nin. With the threads he used as his weapon, he had become a master of traps, able to turn any environment into a deadly maze. He too, like Clementine, also benefited from the number of dead bodies they create doing their job, with him having an endless supply of body parts and organs that he could use. Of course, he did have to fight Clementine off sometimes in order to stop her from eating his prize. Then finally there was Naruto's contribution. Like his teammates, he benefited from the dead bodies of the shinobi, both local and foreign, that they hunt, though unlike them he doesn't have to fight over the choice scraps. No, he gets the souls all to himself. Plus the fact that his abilities were ideal focused on death was useful too. His chakra devoured life, rotting and decaying anything that it touched, be it flesh, wood, or anything living really. It even devoured chakra. But more than that, his chakra didn't just damage a person's body, it could also damage their souls if he wanted. As unlike with the primary nature of his chakra, which was to rot and decay anything it touched, something he could not turn off, his ability to touch, eat and damage souls was something he had absolute control over. Of course, more than once he had gotten in trouble with his teammates for going over the top with his abilities when on the hunt. Neither of them, after all, could make use of a rotted corpse. This meant that most of the time he only used his chakra internally when hunting individual targets, using it to enhance his speed, strength, and durability, which when wielded in conjunction with his axe made him a true fiend on the battlefield even without his most deadly abilities. Suffice to say, the ghoulish nature of their team had become something of a legend to the people of Kirigakura and a nightmare to their enemies and rogue shinobi. Already each of them had a high bounty on their heads from the sum of the other villages, as although there were no current wars, there were constant skirmishes with other villages. Skirmishes that more often than not ended with all the enemies of Kiri dead. The skirmishes were a regular thing for all hunter-nins, as they did not just go after rogue shinobi from their own village, but those from other ones too. This led to a lot of competition in the field. Luckily for Naruto and his team though, the fact that they wore masks when in the field meant that there were no pictures of them to put on the bounty sheets. So although their abilities and code names were well known and feared, their names and appearances were completely unknown. Well, to those outside of Kiri, there were many in Kiri who did know them or at least know of them, but they were smart enough to know that if they blabbed Kiri's secrets to enemies they would not last long. This was common across every shinobi village in the elemental nations. "Oi Pain, get over here!" Naruto heard as he reached the bar. Looking up with a slight grin, he soon found himself looking at Clementine, or Lady Clementine as she still liked to be called. In the last 3 years Clementine, like him, had grown up. She still had her shoulder-length, golden blonde hair and her pink eyes. But now she looked older and more mature, no longer as innocent or childlike as she had. A point she made by what she chose to wear. As she stood by the bar, Naruto could help but let his eyes wander up and down her lithe form. Currently she was wearing very revealing silver armor, that included spiked gauntlets and armored greaves. The rest of her armor though was pretty much an armored bikini, made from the head guards of shinobi she had slain. Her light armor a patchwork of symbols from different shinobi villages. Walking up to her, Naruto leaned on the bar, making eye contact with the bartender as he did so. "I'll have bourbon neat. Been told it is on the house." Nodding, the bartender turned to the shelves of spirits behind the bar, reaching for a clear bottle full of amber-colored liquor. Grabbing it, he then grabbed a small glass from under the bar and began to pour the precious liquid out. "Make it a double," Naruto commented absently as he kept his attention on Clementine. "So trouble, been a while." Naruto said, a slight grin on his face. "Done anything I wouldn't do?" "Not really, just cleaning up after our last job," Clementine replied with a shrug. "Tying up loose ends, you know." "Loose ends?" Naruto asked with a slight frown, barely acknowledging the bartender as he handed him his drink. Yeah, apparently Subaru, that ugly fucker from Otogakure, had a son. Clementine replied with irritation. Had to check to make sure he didn't see anything he shouldn't. Did he? Naruto asked as he took a sip of his drink. Yeah, apparently he saw me rip his daddy's throat out with my teeth. Clementine said with a feral grin, showing off her pearly white teeth as she did so. From behind them they heard the sound out shattering glass. Looking round, Naruto saw the bartender staring at them in horror, a glass having fallen out of his shaking hand. HN must be a newbie. Naruto thought to himself. After all, the denizens of this bar were all hunter neens, ANBU, and former outcasts. They talked about some pretty brutal shit. So did you kill the kid? Naruto replied curiously. Nah, little shit never saw my face, so don't see any harm in letting him live. If anything, it will help to spread our infamy. Clementine replied, once again shrugging as she lifted a cup of cheap red wine to her lips before draining it, grimacing slightly at the nasty taste. Naruto was not fooled though, he knew the real reason she didn't kill the kid. It was her way of maintaining her humanity. The life of an outcast was hard, even now they had a village to call their home. Especially when you had a bloodline that made it so you had to prey on others to survive, that kind of shit would make anyone go insane. But not Clementine. For all she claimed she was a monster, she still had her humanity. Showing the occasional mercy when she could was simply her way of holding on to her humanity. What about you? It's been 2 days since our last mission. Clementine replied as she glared at the bartender, shaking her cup expectantly at him. Paling, the man grabbed a nearby bottle and filled it up before he backed away. Yeah, I doubt he will last long. Naruto once again thought, feeling sorry for the man, as Mina, the owner of the bar, was not the kind of person who knew how to be merciful. Doing some interrogation work for the old hag. Naruto replied, which told Clementine that May had a valuable prisoner she wanted information from. Get anything good from him? The blonde girl asked with interest.
I'm not sure. Naruto replied with a slight frown. What I got from him didn't make much sense to me, but May seemed to know something. I'm surprised she didn't tell you? Clementine said, genuinely surprised. May had a very soft spot for Naruto, letting him get away with most things and often confiding in him more than she would with most. This was probably due to how grateful she was to Naruto over his contribution in the war. So for her not to tell him meant that it could be something big. She doesn't tell me everything you know. Naruto replied with a mock pout. Well, she tells you what color of panties she is wearing, so I would say she tells you a lot. Clementine mocked as she took another swig of wine, only to gag a second later. If it is so revolting, why do you drink it? Naruto sighed as he saw her reaction. Knowing that due to her bloodline, normal food and drink tasted vile to her so much so that she could barely stomach it. It's alcohol, isn't it? Clementine replied shrewishly. Even if it makes me sick, it gets me drunk. True, but that buzz only lasts a few minutes due to your regeneration. Naruto replied without much sympathy, making sure to sigh in content as he drank his own liquor. The girl gave him a death glare at that before she kicked him in the shin. Asshole. She muttered, even as her lips twitched. At least I can heal. Oh, low blow. Naruto said with mock hurt. What she was talking about was a drawback in his bloodline ability. Due to the nature of his abilities being based on death, Naruto had lost the ability to heal naturally. He could still force his body to heal with chakra, which made it a bit small drawback, but still Clementine found it very amusing for some reason. Pain, Clementine. Up to no good again, I see. A familiar voice said, gaining both of their attention. If it isn't Patch, the patchwork scarecrow. Clementine said as she turned to face Victor. Funny, Victor said as he walked up to them. Out of the three of them, Victor was the one who had changed the least. That is to say, his overall personality and appearance had changed the least. His actual body, though, had gone through a number of changes, him having now replaced all of his organs at least once and his limbs probably half a dozen times now. Amusingly enough, he was currently sporting a pale white arm, taken from a particularly annoying IWA shinobi who they had fought on one of their missions, on his left side. But a dark-skinned arm from a Kumo shinobi on his right side, which truly did give him the look at a patchwork man. Looking at his dark-skinned hand, Victor raised it and flipped Clementine the bird. This only succeeded in getting her more excited though. So tell me, Victor, because I am curious. What now? Victor asked wearily. Have you still got your original cock or have you replaced it now? Clementine asked bluntly. Victor and Naruto just stared at her in surprise, the sound of shattering glass telling them that the bartender had dropped yet another glass. Turning to Victor, an eyebrow raised, Naruto asked, Have you? Why the fuck would you ask that? Victor said, completely taken aback. Well, I always heard that men from Kumo had bigger dicks than men from Konoha or anywhere else in the elemental nations. So I thought you might have decided to get yourself a new dick while you were there. Clementine said with a shrug, before looking over at Naruto. No offense for saying you have a little dick though, Pain. Offense taken, Naruto replied as he clasped his hands over his crotch at the thought of Victor going around stealing dicks. How the fuck did we even get onto this topic? Victor shouted, conspicuously avoiding answering as he did so. I did come here for a reason, you know. Course you did. You came to drink with your best mates. Naruto said as he drained the last of his drink and slammed it down on the bar. Hear, hear. Clementine shouted as she drank her own drink, only for her mouth to bulge as she tried to force it down. No, I am here to get you two for the next mission. Victor replied, his voice still a little shrill as he took the goblet of wine out of Clementine's hand before draining it. Well, that was disgusting. I don't know how you drink that cheap swill. Well, if it is all going to taste vile, I might as well buy the cheapest and most alcoholic one I can. The blonde said, trying to justify herself. So what's the mission? Naruto asked, trying to get the mission back on track. No idea, that's why I came to get you. Lady Terumi wants to give us the briefing. Victor replied as he began to make his way out of the bar. But I only just got here. Naruto complained, his black and red eyes looking pleadingly up at the tall Victor. So you one have had time to get comfortable, now come on. Victor replied as he made his way through the crowd of other patrons, most of who back away as they saw Victor's hideous scars and stitches. Has anyone ever told you, you are a bit of an asshole? Naruto replied as he followed along behind Victor. Speaking of which, Victor, have you ever stolen anyone else's asshole? Clementine asked slyly as she too followed the gray-haired man. Fuck off. Victor called back even as Naruto laughed and Clementine giggled to herself. In the Mizukage Tower. Looking on with a slight grin on his face, Naruto could barely keep from laughing as he saw Ao, Mei's right-hand man, glaring at him from where he was standing at Mei's shoulder. Currently they were in Mei's office, with Mei sat behind her desk in a form-fitting blue dress, a slight smile on her face as she looked at Naruto, Victor, and Clementine, all of whom were standing in front of her desk. Around the room, currently hidden from sight, were her retinue of ANBU, elite shinobi that acted as both her bodyguards and her secret police. Not that she need protection considering she was a Kage, one who had killed her predecessor to get the position. I am glad you made such good time getting here, Mei said with a smile. I had been expecting to wait for some time whilst Victor collected you. And leave you waiting here alone, with only that grumpy Cyclops for company? Perish the thought. Naruto said with a look of horror on his face, even as his eyes flickered over to Ao, hiding a smirk as he saw the man tense. Cyclops. Why, you little... Ao began glaring at Naruto with his single good eye. Raising her hand, Mei cut off his reply. Do try to be nice to Ao, Naruto. I'll try, but it will be hard. What with him being a massive dick and all. Naruto said as respectfully as he could. How dar. Ao began again, only to be interrupted by Mei laughing softly to herself. Don't rising to it so much, Ao, and maybe he won't get as much satisfaction from baiting you, Mei said in amusement. As amusing as this is, I did call you here for a reason. Yeah, I know. So who do you want us to kill? Naruto asked, standing a bit straighter as he did. Well, I would prefer it if you brought them back alive, but somehow I think these two might put up some resistance. Mei replied with a slight frown. You would prefer them alive? Naruto queried, justified in his question as they were a kill team. They did not bring back prisoners. Yes, but like I said, I doubt they will come quietly. What is more important than their lives, however, is what they are currently carrying. Mei replied as she brushed away Naruto's concerns. Who are these guys? Clementine butted in impatiently. Not caring as Victor shot her a warning look and Ao hissed silently in displeasure. Do not interrupt, you Mizukage. Ao snapped as he glared at the blonde girl, only for Clementine to glare back, her pink eyes flashing dangerously. Their names are Raiga Kurasuki and Zabuza Momochi. I presume you know what they carry? Mei asked, looking at Naruto. The 7 swordsmen of the mist? Naruto questioned, a frown on his face. Are you planning to reform them? Yes, I have decided that the time is ripe to rebuild them. Kiri is stronger than it has been in decades. Our forces are battle-hardened veterans, but due to the infamy we have received from having the old outcasts clans, we are not getting as many contracts as we should be. Both Kumo and Konoha are receiving more, whilst Iwa and Kiri are trailing behind. This is not acceptable. Mei said, a frown on her face. So reforming the 7 swordsmen is some kind of gimmick? Naruto questioned, scratching the back of his head. Yes and no, the swordsmen were a powerful fighting force, but more than that, they were also a symbol of Kiri's might. Mei explained. Okay, so you want us to hunt down and either recruit or kill the current swordsmen, but either way bring back the swords. Naruto summarized, getting a nod from Mei as he did. But wouldn't that leave us 1 blade short? After all, Kiri only had 4 of the blades at present, 3 of which are already in the hands of the next generation in training. Ao added in. What about the other one? Naruto asked, ignoring Ao. Samahata, currently wielded by Kisame Hashigaki. My agents are trying to get a location but have been struggling at the moment. But rest assured, when we do find him, I will be sending you after him too. Mei replied, a scowl on her face as she thought about their lack of success in tracking down the rogue shinobi. Okay, sounds like a good fight, Naruto said with a grin on his face at the thought of the mission to come. He loved traveling and he also loved fighting. Where do we start looking? The answer he received was 2 folders being dropped on Mei's desk by Ao. Scooping them up, Naruto nodded. We'll get to work then. But what if someone gets in our way? Depends who they are and what they are doing. Mei shrugged before gaining a hard look in her eye. But if they get in the way of your mission, terminate them with extreme prejudice. Understood. The 3 Hunter said in unison.